Can you imagine it? A military uniform, a symbol of honor and loyalty, turned into fabricated evidence used to condemn an innocent person. A decorated general who once fought for justice, now hunted like a fugitive, all because of a rushed judgment tainted by prejudice. Vanessa, a highly respected general in the U.S. Army, only wanted to enjoy a day at the fair with her family. But then, a daring robbery erupted, triggering a frenzied manhunt. The thief vanished without a trace, but with nothing more than a vague eyewitness account, the police immediately identified their culprit, someone wearing a military uniform. And, as fate would have it, Vanessa was the only one who fit that description. No solid evidence, no chance to explain. Guns were already being drawn, and with a single sharp command a police dog lunged, its fangs aimed straight at the innocent general. But this wasn't just a wrongful arrest. Behind it lay a tangled web of deception, dark secrets hidden by those sworn to uphold justice. A conspiracy carefully orchestrated long before that day. A truth so dangerous it could bring an entire system crashing down if exposed. As the storm of reckoning begins to rise, who will stand? Who will fall? And most importantly, how will Vanessa fight not just for her own justice, but for all those crushed beneath the wheels of power? You can't afford to miss this high-stakes story. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, hit like, and subscribe to the channel to help spread this message of justice even further. Laughter and cheerful conversations filled the city center as hundreds of people poured into the summer fair. Vibrant stalls lined the streets, the scent of baked goods and buttered popcorn mingling in the air, while live music from a street band had people tapping their feet and swaying along. Children darted between game booths, eager to win colorful stuffed animals, while adults chatted, sipping cold beer and savoring sizzling skewers fresh off the grill. Vanessa Carter, a distinguished black general in the U.S. Army, walked through the crowd with a warm smile. Her neatly pressed uniform hugged her tall, commanding frame, medals gleaming under the afternoon sun, leaving an undeniable impression on those who noticed her. But she wasn't here to attract attention. Today, she just wanted to blend into the joy of the community, like everyone else. She stopped at a handcrafted jewelry stall, admiring a collection of intricately knotted leather bracelets. A young boy, no older than 10, with tight curls and eager eyes, picked up a navy blue bracelet and hesitantly held it out to her. "I made this one," he said softly, his eyes lighting up as he recognized the woman before him, the General Carter he had seen on the news. Vanessa smiled, carefully taking the bracelet and holding it up to the light. "You made this? It's beautiful. My uniform is navy blue, too. Maybe I should buy this one." The boy grinned from ear to ear, and his mother, a young woman with neatly tied hair, nodded encouragingly. "Would you like a picture with General Carter?" The boy nodded so enthusiastically that he nearly knocked over the display of bracelets. Vanessa chuckled, crouching down so his mother could snap a photo. Everything was peaceful. A perfect day in the heart of the city. And then, a loud explosion shattered that peace. From the far end of the street, a wave of terrified screams rippled through the crowd, followed by the sound of shattering glass. The blaring wail of an alarm pierced the air, cutting through the once festive atmosphere like a knife. Vanessa immediately turned toward the source of the commotion, her sharp eyes scanning the chaos. A robbery. In the blink of an eye, the bustling square turned into a frenzy. People pushed and shoved, scrambling to escape from the direction of King's Jewelers, where shards of broken glass still rained onto the sidewalk. A store employee, his face pale with shock, staggered out, clutching a bleeding wound on his forehead, crimson streaks running down his cheek. Inside the store, display cases had been overturned, diamonds and luxury watches scattered across the floor. A man in a navy blue military uniform rummaged through a drawer behind the counter, a gun gripped tightly in his hand. His attire resembled that of a soldier, but the cap pulled low over his face obscured his identity. A brave customer near the entrance shouted, "Stop him! He's robbing the store!" The thief snapped his head up, his eyes flashing with panic. Without hesitation, he vaulted over the counter and bolted toward the door. A patrolling police officer had just arrived, drawing his gun and barking, "Freeze!" hands in the air. But the thief reacted instantly. 2 gunshots rang out. Screams erupted as the bullets hit their mark, one embedding into a street sign overhead, the other shattering the window of a coffee shop across the road. Without missing a beat, the thief vanished into the fleeing crowd, weaving through the panicked masses at the fair. Nearby, Officer Ethan Hayes, a seasoned detective with the city police department, received the alert through his radio. Armed robbery at King's Jewelers. Suspect is male, wearing a military uniform, moving into the fairgrounds. All units, proceed with pursuit. Ethan's jaw tightened. A suspect in uniform? Someone who could blend in seamlessly among the crowd? His instincts kicked into high gear. His eyes swept across the square, scanning the chaos, until they landed on something that made every connection in his mind snap into place. A tall figure in a navy blue military uniform standing amidst the crowd. Vanessa Carter. In that moment, Ethan didn't realize his mistake. His mind was consumed by the pursuit order, by the single descriptor that now matched the woman right before him. Without hesitation, he lifted his radio, his voice firm and decisive. Target matching suspect description. Moving through the fairgrounds, requesting immediate backup. As he lowered the radio, his grip tightened on his holster, his eyes locked onto Vanessa. She was still chatting with the small group, a smile lingering on her lips, completely unaware that she had just become the prime suspect in the eyes of a man with the power to take her down. Ethan's pulse pounded as he quickened his steps, adrenaline surging through his veins. Right now, all that mattered to him was doing his job, apprehending the suspect before they could escape, and that meant Vanessa Carter wasn't going anywhere. Ethan strode toward Vanessa, his sharp eyes locked onto her every movement. His hand instinctively tightened around his holster, his entire body tense, ready to act at a moment's notice. The fair remained bustling with people, but in Ethan's mind, everything else blurred into the background. There was only one thing in his vision: a suspect in uniform, standing in the middle of the crowd. Vanessa was still smiling, crouched slightly as she chatted with an elderly woman selling handcrafted goods. She had no idea that danger was closing in. "Hey, stop right there!" Ethan's authoritative voice cut through the lively atmosphere of the fair. People around them flinched and turned, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease as they saw the officer approaching with a hardened look. Vanessa frowned, glancing toward the voice. She saw a uniformed officer, his eyes filled with suspicion, moving straight toward her. "Are you talking to me?" she asked, her tone calm, but her gaze now sharp with caution. "Yes, I'm Officer Ethan Hayes, City Police Department. I need you to answer some questions immediately." Murmurs spread through the surrounding crowd. A general in the military being stopped by the police? Right in the middle of the fair? What was going on? Vanessa slowly straightened, her expression sharpening as she met Ethan's gaze. She could read his body language with precision, the way his hand hovered dangerously close to his gun, the way his jaw was clenched, the way his eyes studied her every move. "I'm willing to cooperate," she said, her voice measured and firm. "But I need to know what this is about." Ethan didn't blink, his voice steady and unyielding. "A robbery just took place at King's Jewelers. Witnesses reported the suspect was wearing a military uniform. You were seen near the crime scene, and I need to know why you're here." A brief silence. Vanessa stared at him as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "You think I'm the robber?" she asked, emphasizing each word, her voice carrying both disbelief and restrained anger. Ethan didn't answer immediately. The suspicion still gripped his mind. "I'm just doing my job. Tell me why you're here, now." Vanessa crossed her arms, exhaling sharply to control her frustration. "I am Lieutenant General Vanessa Carter, United States Army," she stated, enunciating each word with measured intensity. "I came here to attend the community fair, just like any other citizen. I have no reason to be involved in a robbery." Though her tone remained composed, the crowd could sense the underlying disappointment and irritation surfacing in her eyes. The whispers around them grew louder. "She's a general. Doesn't he recognize her? What's going on? Why are they treating her like this?" But Ethan remained unmoved. The pursuit order echoed in his head. Male suspect, military uniform, hiding within the fairgrounds. Vanessa was female, yes, but she was the only person in uniform here. With years of experience in law enforcement, Ethan knew that if a suspect truly wanted to disappear in a crowd, disguising themselves as someone in power, a military officer, would be the perfect cover. He lifted his radio, his voice cold as steel. "Suspect may be dangerous. Request an immediate backup. K-9 unit. Move into position." The moment Ethan gave the command, a police vehicle nearby swung open, and a German shepherd leaped out, barking aggressively as its handler directed it toward Vanessa. "Step back now," Ethan ordered, his voice cutting through the growing tension in the crowd. Vanessa couldn't believe what she was seeing. They were sending a police dog after her? "Officer Hayes, you're taking this too far," she warned, her voice now laced with ice. But Ethan didn't back down. He had received his orders, and he intended to carry them out, regardless of who she was. The police dog snarled, its fur bristling, sensing the growing hostility in the air. People in the fair gasped in horror, parents yanking their children away from the escalating scene. Vanessa instinctively raised a hand in defense, her gaze locked onto the approaching dog. She had trained alongside military working dogs before, but never had she imagined being on the receiving end of one. Then, in a split-second move, the dog lunged, its jaws snapping dangerously close to her arm. Vanessa sidestepped with the precision of a seasoned warrior, her movements fluid and controlled. But her eyes burned with a different fire now. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This was an insult. "Call your dog off. Now!" she snapped. Ethan barely had time to process what was happening before he realized that Vanessa hadn't made a single aggressive move. But it was already too late. A moment that never should have happened had just unfolded in the heart of the city. The crowd stood frozen. A decorated military officer being targeted in the middle of a fair by the very police sworn to protect the public. Shock and outrage spread like wildfire. "Stop this immediately!" a woman screamed, clutching her child's arm. "She didn't do anything." Others began to speak up, their voices rising in protest. Angry stares, furious murmurs. Vanessa remained standing, unwavering despite the chaos spiraling around her. She fixed Ethan with a look that could cut through stone. "You just made a big mistake." And Ethan felt it, instantly. The wave of outrage spread rapidly through the fair. Shouts and protests erupted, blending with the sharp crackle of Ethan's radio. A decorated general arrested by the police in the middle of a community fair. It was an image no one could have imagined. Vanessa Carter, a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting her country, was now being subdued as if she were a common criminal. Ethan pulled out a pair of handcuffs and stepped toward her. "General Carter, you are being detained for questioning. We need to take you to the station immediately." Vanessa did not resist, but her eyes burned with fury as she stared straight at him. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice low but filled with authority. "I'm just following protocol," Ethan replied, but his voice no longer held the same conviction. "You just made a huge mistake, Officer Hayes, and I guarantee you this won't end the way you think it will." The click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists triggered an immediate uproar from the crowd. "Let her go. This is blatant racial profiling. General Carter did nothing wrong." Dozens of people pulled out their phones, recording everything. Some had already started live streaming, and within minutes, videos of Vanessa Carter's arrest were flooding social media. But Ethan remained cold as he escorted Vanessa to the patrol car. She walked slowly, her head held high, refusing to show fear or humiliation. She knew she was innocent. She would fight this to the very end. At the Central Police Department, Vanessa was taken into an interrogation room, her wrists still cuffed, sitting across from Ethan and his superior, Lieutenant Harold Thompson. Thompson, a middle-aged man with graying hair and stress lines etched across his face, stood with his arms crossed, watching Vanessa with a calculating expression. Ethan sat across from her, fingers interlocked, trying to maintain composure, but he couldn't shake the creeping doubt settling in his mind. Vanessa remained composed, but her sharp gaze pierced through Ethan. "Go ahead. Let's see what evidence you have against me." Ethan exhaled, flipping open the case file in front of him. A witness saw a suspect in military uniform rob King's Jewelers. You were seen at the fairgrounds shortly after the incident, also wearing a military uniform. Can you explain why you were in the area? Vanessa let out a dry chuckle, but there was no amusement in her eyes. "Do I really need to remind you that I arrived at this fair long before the robbery happened? There are photos and videos proving I've been here all day. And now you want me to explain why I was at the scene of a crime that I didn't even know occurred." Ethan frowned. Thompson cut in, his tone firm. "General Carter, if you cooperate, this will go much easier." Vanessa straightened in her seat, her gaze unwavering. "Cooperate?" she repeated slowly. "I have already told you, I had no involvement. If you have actual evidence, show it to me. If not, I want to speak to my lawyer. Right, now." Thompson shot a displeased glance at Ethan, but Ethan was starting to sense something was wrong. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't dodging the questions. She wasn't acting like someone with something to hide. But a man trained to obey orders wouldn't back down so easily. "Fine," Ethan muttered. "Call your lawyer." Within 30 minutes, the door to the interrogation room swung open. Linda Foster, a sharp-eyed black woman in a crisp gray suit, walked in with an air of absolute authority. She scanned Vanessa quickly, noting that her client remained calm and in control. Linda set her briefcase down, took a seat across from Ethan and Thompson, and folded her hands. "My client will not be answering any further questions unless you provide concrete evidence against her." Thompson scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You think you can stop this investigation, Ms. Foster?" Linda smiled faintly, but her eyes were razor-sharp. I'm just making sure you don't turn my client into a scapegoat for a lazy investigation." Ethan felt the sting in her words. But before he could respond, Linda reached into her briefcase and slid a thick file across the table. I've spoken to witnesses, reviewed security footage from around the fairgrounds, and I have some very important news for the two of you. The actual suspect left the area right after the robbery, about 5 minutes before my client even arrived at the fair. Ethan stiffened. Thompson leaned forward, his posture shifting. What? Linda nodded, pushing a stack of printed photos toward them. The thief escaped down an alleyway several blocks from the crime scene. A witness saw him jump into a black SUV and drive off immediately. A cold wave ran down Ethan's spine. Which means... Linda rested her hands on the table, her voice razor sharp. Which means you didn't just arrest the wrong person. You let the real criminal slip through your fingers. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Vanessa Carter clenched her fists. She had warned them from the very beginning. They had made an unforgivable mistake. And now, the truth was beginning to unravel. Ethan sat motionless in his office, eyes glued to the computer screen. The footage from the traffic cameras played back slowly, frame by frame. He rewound and replayed the footage multiple times, searching for an inconsistency, something that could prove he had been right. But the more he watched, the tighter his chest became. On the screen, the timestamp was clear, 4:32 p.m. A man in a military uniform, though noticeably smaller, thinner, and with shorter hair than Vanessa Carter, was seen sprinting across the street behind King's Jewelers. 4:33 p.m. He jumped into a black SUV and sped off. 4:37 p.m. Vanessa Carter appeared near the fairgrounds. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine. I arrested the wrong person. He shook his head, telling himself it couldn't be. There was no way he had made such a massive mistake. From the beginning, he was certain Vanessa was suspicious. So why was everything now pointing to her innocence? Ethan let go of the mouse, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the screen. His mind was a tangled mess of confusion, doubt, and fear. Fear that he had been wrong. Fear that the system he had trusted his entire career might actually be flawed. The office door swung open, and Harold Thompson stepped in, holding a file. "Hayes, I heard you were reviewing security footage." Ethan turned, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes, I'm rechecking the suspect's movements. I think there's a chance There's no need." Thompson cut him off, his voice cold. Ethan froze. "You're saying there's no need?" Thompson placed the file on the desk, leaning in to lock eyes with Ethan. "We already have a suspect. The media is all over this. Do you think reopening the case benefits anyone?" A sinking feeling settled in Ethan's stomach. "But sir, we have video evidence clearly showing." "I don't care what the video shows, Hayes." Thompson's voice dropped lower. "I need you to focus on maintaining public trust in the police. We don't need more problems." Ethan suddenly found it hard to breathe. His entire career, he had believed that law enforcement was about protecting justice, that the police were the line between order and chaos. He believed in the system, in protocol, in the idea that if he followed the law, the right outcomes would follow. But now, he was being ordered to ignore evidence, to uphold a decision he knew was wrong. Ethan turned back to his screen. The numbers on the footage didn't lie. The GPS records from the patrol cars didn't lie. The person he had arrested could not be the real suspect. For a brief moment, Vanessa Carter's piercing gaze from the interrogation room flashed in his mind. "You just made a huge mistake." Ethan ran a hand over his face, trying to suppress the pounding headache forming behind his eyes. If he admitted she was right, that meant he had destroyed the reputation of an honorable woman. That meant the system he served wasn't always about justice, and that meant he could no longer ignore the truth. Taking a deep breath, Ethan grabbed his phone and dialed the number of a witness listed in the case file. An older man's voice answered. "Hello?" Ethan gripped the phone tighter, glancing at the office door to make sure no one was listening. "This is Officer Ethan Hayes, City Police Department. I need to confirm some details about the King's Jewelers robbery." There was a long pause. "Oh, so the police finally want to hear the real story?" A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "What do you mean?" "I told the officers from the beginning that I saw a man running away from the scene, but no one seemed to care. They just wanted someone in a military uniform to blame." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. "Are you sure? Can you describe the man?" "I didn't get a clear look at his face, but I can tell you this. He was much skinnier than the woman they arrested." Ethan went rigid. The evidence was undeniable. So why had Thompson ordered him to bury it? Ethan ended the call and slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling. Everything had become painfully clear. He hadn't been wrong because he followed orders. He had been wrong because he had never questioned those orders. He had always trusted the system, law enforcement, and his duty to enforce the law. But was this system really built for justice? Or was it only built to protect itself? His jaw clenched, anger bubbling up in his chest. Not at Thompson, but at himself. He had let bias cloud his judgment. He hadn't asked the right questions. He had hurt an innocent woman. And now he had two choices: ignore the truth, protect his career, and obey Thompson's orders. Dig deeper, prove Vanessa's innocence, and risk everything. Ethan stared at the footage on his screen. A voice in the back of his mind whispered, his own voice, questioning him one last time before he made his decision. "Are you going to keep being their pawn? Or will you stand up for real justice?" Outside, the sky had darkened to a deep shade of indigo, the streetlights casting faint glows through his office window. Ethan took a deep breath, then stood up. He knew there was no turning back now. The holding cell door swung open, light from the hallway casting sharp shadows across Vanessa Carter's cold, unyielding face. Linda Foster stepped in first, her sharp gaze sweeping over the small room before settling on one of Lieutenant Harold Thompson's subordinates, a young officer standing tensely against the wall, clearly wanting no part in the storm that was about to erupt. "General Carter, you're free to go." Linda's voice was firm, her tone carrying undeniable authority. Vanessa didn't move at first. She locked eyes with the officer, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then, without a word, she stood, adjusted her uniform, and strode past them with an air of unshaken dignity, as if she had never been detained in the first place. Standing in the hallway was Ethan Hayes, his eyes quietly tracking her every movement. He started to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps an explanation, but Vanessa walked past him without even glancing his way. She had nothing left to say to this man. He had arrested her like a criminal. Now it was her turn to fight back. Vanessa didn't go home immediately. She couldn't. The emotions that had been suppressed for hours were now rising inside her like a tidal wave. She couldn't let this slide. She had given everything to this country, dedicated her life to it. And yet, standing in the middle of a community she had fought to protect, she had been treated as a threat just because of her uniform and the color of her skin. Vanessa knew she wasn't the first, and she would make damn sure she wasn't the last. Linda had already arranged a press conference outside the police station. By the time they arrived, a massive crowd had gathered, holding signs with bold letters. "She is innocent. Justice for General Carter. We will not be silent." Dozens of reporters stood ready, cameras and microphones aimed at a small stage where Vanessa and Linda would make their statement. Vanessa stepped up to the podium, inhaling deeply. She scanned the faces before her, faces filled with anger, disappointment, but also hope. These people had seen her humiliated, and now they stood beside her, demanding justice. She could not let them down. Vanessa placed both hands on the podium, her voice strong and unwavering as she spoke. Today, I stand here, not just for myself. I stand for everyone who has ever been unfairly judged, who has ever been seen as a threat just because of the way they look, who has been accused without reason, without proof, without hesitation. A roar of agreement erupted from the crowd, fists raised high. I have served this country for over 20 years. Vanessa's eyes locked onto the cameras, her voice cutting through the noise with unshakable authority. And, in one single moment, everything I have fought for, everything I have given, was cast aside because one police officer looked at me and saw a suspect. No apology, no hesitation, just accusations. She paused, scanning the sea of cameras and expectant faces. So, I ask you this. Vanessa's voice dropped lower, yet carried more power than ever. If this can happen to me, a general in the United States Army, then who will it happen to next? And how many more people will endure this without anyone standing up for them? The weight of her words hung in the air for a moment. Then, the crowd erupted in applause, chants of "Justice! Justice! Justice!" echoing through the streets. Vanessa clenched her fists, turning toward the cameras. I will not be silent. I will not accept this as just another unfortunate incident. And I will fight until what happened to me never happens to anyone else again. Linda Foster stepped up beside her, placing a reassuring hand on Vanessa's shoulder. We are taking this fight to the courts. Linda's voice rang clear and authoritative. We demand an official investigation into police misconduct, and we will not stop until justice is served. The cheers from the crowd grew louder. The battle had officially begun. As Vanessa and Linda stepped off the stage, a woman with fiery red hair, dressed in a sleek dark suit, approached them quickly. General Carter, Attorney Foster. Linda's sharp instincts immediately went on alert. Who are you? The woman offered a knowing smile, reaching into her pocket to pull out a press badge. Rachel Adams, investigative journalist from the National Ledger. I want to help you take this story nationwide. Vanessa narrowed her eyes, studying Rachel carefully, trying to assess if she was trustworthy. But Rachel didn't flinch. Her gaze held steady, unwavering. Look, she said, voice firm. I'm not here to turn your story into just another headline. I know cases like yours have happened before, but they get buried, covered up, forgotten. You're a general. You have a voice. You have power. You can make sure this case isn't ignored. I want to help you do that. Vanessa considered her words carefully, then slowly nodded. I'll think about it. Rachel handed her business card to Linda. Call me when you're ready. Vanessa stared at the card for a moment, knowing that this fight was no longer just a lawsuit. She could turn this into something bigger, a movement, a fight to protect those who had no voice, and she wouldn't stop, not until justice was truly served. Morning at the city police headquarters was heavier than ever. The press swarmed outside with major news stations broadcasting live as citizens held up their signs. Justice for General Carter. Police must be held accountable. No hiding place for corruption. Reporters rushed toward officers entering and exiting the building, firing off questions like bullets. Their faces were tense, avoiding eye contact. Heads bowed as they hurried inside, as if one wrong look could ignite another protest. Inside, the emergency briefing room was packed tight. Lieutenant Harold Thompson slammed a thick file onto the table, his voice booming across the room like a thunderclap. "I want every single one of you to keep your mouths shut about this case. No one talks to the press, understood?" The officers nodded reluctantly, but some exchanged glances, their eyes drifting toward Ethan Hayes, the only one who had yet to speak, his expression dark, eyes fixed on the table. He knew this wasn't just about Vanessa Carter anymore. Ethan stood up after the meeting, walking back to his desk. As he moved through the office, some colleagues turned away, pretending not to see him. Others stood in small groups, whispering under their breath before chuckling quietly. When he finally reached his desk, a piece of paper was taped to his monitor. "Why are you defending that woman?" Ethan clenched his jaw, tearing the note down and crumpling it in his fist. His breathing was heavier than before. He knew what was happening. He was being isolated. But what truly troubled him was the sinking feeling that something far darker was at play. Why had Vanessa's arrest warrant been issued so quickly from higher-ups? Why was the robbery report restricted, only accessible to a select few senior officers? Something wasn't right. And now, he was being watched too. Late at night, Vanessa was preparing for bed when a faint noise from the front door made her pause. She turned her head toward the sound, her eyes narrowing as she moved cautiously forward. In the dim glow of her living room light, she saw it. A thick envelope had been slipped through the mail slot, resting neatly on the floor, like an uninvited guest. Vanessa slowly crouched down, fingertips grazing the rough paper. A cold chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from a sharp instinct. She didn't hesitate. With one swift motion, she tore it open. Inside was a single typed note. Each word was bold, neat, calculated, but carried a chilling weight. "Stop. You have no idea who you're up against." Vanessa's eyes narrowed as a slow burn of tension spread through her veins. But it wasn't fear that settled in. It was anger. A small photograph slipped from the envelope and landed on the table. She picked it up, and her expression darkened. It was a single bullet, placed carefully on a wooden surface. A reminder. A threat. A clear message of what could happen if she kept pushing forward. For a moment, she was silent, staring at the too familiar image before her. But instead of fear, a smirk curled at the corner of her lips. Is that all? Did they really think a pathetic intimidation tactic could make her back down? They didn't know who they were dealing with. She had stood on battlefields, faced enemies who wanted her dead without hesitation. She had seen death flash before her eyes, survived wars where one wrong move meant the end. A single envelope and a bullet meant nothing. Vanessa calmly folded the note, setting it on the table as if it were nothing more than an unimportant memo. Then she grabbed her phone and dialed Linda Foster. The call barely rang 3 times before the attorney answered. "We need to speed up the lawsuit." Linda's voice instantly sharpened. "What happened?" "Someone sent me a warning," Vanessa replied, her tone steady, sharp as a blade. "But instead of stopping me, they just gave me another reason to keep going." She exhaled slowly, the fire in her eyes growing stronger. "They don't want me digging deeper? Good. Now I'll make sure the whole world sees the truth." It was close to midnight when Ethan received a strange text message on his phone. "I have information about Carter's case. Meet me in the underground parking lot, level 3, old building on Lexington Street. Alone." Ethan sat up straight, a chill running down his spine. An unknown number, a short, precise message. But what stood out the most? The name Carter. He couldn't ignore this. 30 minutes later, he arrived at the location. The parking lot was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the old concrete walls. Aside from a black sedan parked in a dark corner, the place was empty. Ethan approached cautiously, his hand instinctively gripping his holstered gun, his mind already running through the worst-case scenarios. When he was about 3 meters away, the car door creaked open, and a man in a dark hoodie stepped out. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his voice, it was oddly familiar. "Ethan, no need to be so tense. I'm not your enemy." Ethan narrowed his eyes, trying to place the voice, and then, as the man stepped into the faint light, Ethan froze. "David Clark?" David glanced around cautiously, making sure no one else was watching before speaking in a low voice. "We don't have much time. I have proof that Vanessa Carter's arrest wasn't just a mistake. It was planned." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" David scanned the area once more before pulling a small USB drive from his pocket and pressing it into Ethan's hand. "Your superior, Harold Thompson, used you to take Carter down. Not because they believed she was a suspect, but because they needed a distraction, a scapegoat, to divert public attention from something bigger." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had suspected something was off, but hearing it confirmed by an insider made it feel like a punch to the gut. "Be more specific." David exhaled deeply, speaking faster now. "A group of high-ranking officers have been running a corruption racket, protecting criminal organizations in the city in exchange for bribes. 2 weeks ago, an undercover FBI agent was investigating them. But before he could act, he was falsely accused of corruption and terminated without a trace of evidence. They buried him. And now, they've done the same to Carter." Ethan felt sweat prickling his back. His voice was cold but controlled. "Why her? What do they want from Carter?" David's expression darkened. "Because Carter is the only one who can bring them down. Years ago, she led a classified military operation. Among the restricted files she had access to, there was intel linking certain criminal networks directly to Harold Thompson and other top officers. If she gets her hands on that data, it will expose them all." Ethan tightened his grip on the USB, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "So, they didn't just want her arrested, they wanted her silenced." David nodded, his face grim. "Exactly. And Ethan, you need to understand this. If you keep digging, you'll be their next target too." The air between them turned heavy, suffocating. Ethan felt as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff. On one side was everything he had ever believed in, the police force he had served loyally for years. On the other was the raw, ugly truth of a system rotting from the inside, using him as a puppet to enforce a false sense of justice. David watched him carefully, waiting. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, took a deep breath, then opened them again. When he spoke, his voice was clear, unwavering. "I can't turn my back on the truth." David held his gaze for a moment before offering a small, weary smile. "Good, because I can't either." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick folder, placing it on the car hood. "This is everything I have. Past cases, names of people just like Carter. People the system crushed because they knew too much. If we're doing this, we have to move fast, because they won't sit back and let us take them down." Ethan picked up the file, flipping through the pages. Names, faces, people who had been set up, just like Vanessa. For the first time in his career, he realized he had been standing on the wrong side for too long. And now, it was time to stand on the right one. Ethan looked up, determination solidifying in his eyes. "I'm going to help Carter expose the truth. We're taking them down." David nodded, though his voice remained cautious. Be careful, Ethan, because once we do this, there's no turning back." Ethan let out a small, dry chuckle, a calmness settling over him. "I know." Outside City Hall, a sea of people had gathered since early morning, raising signs condemning police misconduct. Chants echoed across the square, the air thick with tension yet charged with determination. Reporters from major news networks had their cameras fixed on the stage, where Vanessa Carter, Ethan Hayes, and journalist Rachel Adams were about to reveal a shocking truth. Vanessa stood at the center, her crisp military uniform and commanding presence making her a striking figure under the flashing lights. Rachel stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and authoritative. "Today, we are here to expose a cover-up that has gone on for too long. The documents we hold will prove that not just one individual, but an entire system, has been manipulating the truth, destroying the reputation of a decorated general and countless other victims." The crowd fell silent for a brief moment before whispers spread and cameras clicked furiously. Rachel held up a thick file, David's evidence, exposing corruption, abuse of power, and wrongful arrests that the city's police department had deliberately buried. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice calm yet powerful. "I am General Vanessa Carter of the United States Army. I have dedicated my life to defending this country. And yet, here on my own soil, I became a target, not for committing a crime, but because those in power needed to protect their secrets. I am not here to seek pity. I am here to demand justice." A wave of cheers erupted, some in the crowd shouting their support, but the tension remained thick. Rachel turned to Ethan, giving him a slight nod. This was the moment when a police officer would publicly turn against the very institution he had sworn to serve. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping up to the mic. The stage went silent. "I am Officer Ethan Hayes, and today, I admit, I was wrong." The crowd exploded. Gasps, murmurs, cameras flashing nonstop. A police officer publicly confessing his mistake wasn't just news, it was a bombshell. "I participated in General Carter's arrest believing I was doing the right thing. But after reviewing the evidence, I realized I was manipulated. I no longer trust those running this police department, and today I stand here to say I will not let this happen again." Ethan's phone buzzed violently in his pocket, a flood of threatening messages. From the crowd, a few men in plain clothes discreetly left, but Vanessa noticed them immediately. Undercover cops. Rachel felt the shift in energy, but she refused to let the moment slip away. "We demand an independent investigation into all the cases that have been covered up, and we will not stop until those responsible are held accountable." Within minutes, the police department retaliated. A suspension notice was sent to Ethan, faster than he expected. When Ethan arrived at headquarters, two high-ranking officers were waiting for him. "Hayes, hand over your badge and weapon." Ethan clenched his fists but silently complied, removing his badge and placing his gun on the table. "You can't bury the truth forever." Thompson smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "You really think you can change anything? Soon enough, this will all be buried, and you'll just be another disgraced cop who lost his job for not following orders." Ethan held his stare, unwavering, but he said nothing. Outside the police station, Vanessa was waiting. As Ethan stepped out, she didn't offer pity, only determination. "You're not one of them anymore." Ethan gave a small nod. "Then tell me, what's next?" Vanessa smirked coldly, pulling out her phone and dialing a number. "It's time to call in stronger allies." Vanessa wasn't just a general. She had high-level political connections. As news of the scandal spread, lawmakers began taking notice. That evening, in a private meeting room, Vanessa sat across from Senator Jonathan Wright, a staunch advocate against corruption. "I need congressional backing to demand a full-scale Department of Justice investigation into the police department." The senator leaned back, studying her before nodding slowly. "I've been following this. Do you have the evidence?" Vanessa slid a thick folder across the table. "Everything. Records of corruption, names of those involved." Wright flipped through the damning documents, his expression hardening. After a moment, he locked eyes with Vanessa. "I'll bring this to Congress." Outside, thousands of protesters filled the streets, their chants demanding justice. News stations covered the movement nonstop. The entire nation was beginning to pay attention. But Vanessa knew one thing for certain. She and Ethan had poked the beast, and now it was going to fight back. The only question was, how long could they withstand it? Just hours after Vanessa Carter and Ethan Hayes' press conference, new headlines flooded national television. On screen, edited footage of Vanessa in handcuffs at the fair played repeatedly, carefully cut to make it seem like she was resisting arrest. A cold, calculated voice narrated the segment, hinting that Vanessa had acted suspiciously and failed to comply with law enforcement. Inside the police headquarters, Harold Thompson sat at his desk, eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he watched the news unfold. "We've controlled the narrative. Let's see what they can do now." Thompson didn't stop at manipulating the media. He leveraged his political connections to pressure independent news outlets into removing articles that supported Vanessa and Ethan. Make sure they have no platform to speak. But what he hadn't accounted for was the determination of those he was trying to silence. In a dimly lit cafe, Rachel Adams sat across from an anonymous informant. The man slid a USB drive across the table, his hands slightly trembling. "This is everything I could get. A list of officers involved in wrongful arrests over the last decade, along with bank transactions proving they were bribed. If you release this, they won't let you go." Rachel took the USB, her pulse quickening. She had always known Thompson was dangerous, but this was bigger than she ever imagined. An hour later, as she arrived at her newsroom, her phone rang with a blocked number. "Stop now, or we'll come for you." She exhaled slowly, then hung up without a word. Plugging in the USB, her screen filled with classified documents, a list of victims framed by police, recorded conversations between Thompson and corrupt officials, financial statements of embezzled funds. The evidence was undeniable. One wrong move and she could disappear forever. But if she didn't release it, justice would never come for Vanessa and Ethan. Rachel made her decision. She was going all in. Meanwhile, David Clark, the officer who had leaked the files, was driving home when a dark-colored SUV began tailing him. Its high beams reflected off his rearview mirror, blinding him. David's grip tightened on the wheel. He pressed the gas, trying to lose them, but another vehicle suddenly blocked the intersection ahead. A trap. Before he could react, two men in black clothing stepped out. One held a baton, the other wore black leather gloves. "You think you can betray the department?" one of them growled, stepping closer. David braced himself, but the first punch hit hard, knocking the air from his lungs as he collapsed onto the pavement. One of them grabbed his phone, scrolling through his messages. "We're too late. He already sent the files." David coughed, blood staining his lips. "That's right. And there's nothing you can do about it." Just before losing consciousness, he saw the blue flashing lights of an approaching ambulance. He didn't know if he would survive. But he knew one thing for certain. The truth was already out. In a live TV studio, Rachel faced the camera, millions watching nationwide. Tonight, we are revealing classified documents that will expose the corruption inside the city's police force. The screen changed, showing scanned documents, recorded conversations between Thompson and top officials, detailed lists of stolen funds, and direct orders for framing innocent people. The nation was stunned. Public outrage exploded. Protests erupted across multiple cities, and government officials were forced to respond. Within hours, the Department of Justice announced an independent federal investigation into the police force's corruption and abuse of power. Vanessa watched the news unfold, her eyes burning with determination. Outside, Ethan took a deep breath, clenching his fists as if steadying himself for what was coming. The storm had only just begun. The storm of media scrutiny and public pressure left the authorities with no choice but to act. The official investigation moved swiftly, with federal oversight agencies stepping in to examine every piece of evidence Vanessa, Ethan, and their team had exposed. Within a week, Harold Thompson was suspended from duty, facing a series of serious charges ranging from abuse of power and evidence tampering to covering up misconduct. High-ranking officers involved in the corruption network were systematically investigated, with many stripped of their badges and some arrested on the spot at police headquarters. News channels were flooded with reports of the largest purge in the city's police history. Images of Thompson in handcuffs, surrounded by reporters as he was led away, became a symbol of the collapse of the old system. Shortly after, the police department announced a full-scale reform. A series of new policies were introduced, including an independent oversight system to investigate complaints of discrimination and misconduct, mandatory training on racial bias and ethical standards, increased community involvement in officer recruitment and oversight. These changes did not come easily, but they were the result of those who dared to stand against injustice. Despite his pivotal role in exposing the truth, Ethan could not escape the consequences. His police badge was revoked, with the new leadership stating that he had violated internal protocols, despite the public viewing him as a hero. On the day Ethan left the police force, there was no farewell, but he felt neither fear nor regret. A few weeks later, Ethan became one of the most recognized whistleblowers in the country, joining organizations that monitored law enforcement agencies. He used his story to warn young officers about the temptations and moral pitfalls within the system. He no longer wore a uniform, but for the first time in years, he felt he was truly protecting justice. After a long legal battle, Vanessa officially won her case against the police department. The moment the court announced the ruling in her favor, the courtroom erupted in applause, and millions who had followed the case across the media expressed their support. But for Vanessa, this was not the end. Shortly after the trial, she received an invitation from Congress, offering her a position as an advisor on police reform, using her experience to drive change from within. Standing before the Capitol, her gaze was firm as she looked ahead. They had tried to silence her, but in the end, they had only given her a louder microphone. The police department was no longer the same. Those who had ruled with corruption were gone, and new policies were slowly taking effect. Ethan and Vanessa stood on different paths, but shared the same purpose. Both knew that the fight against abuse of power was not one that could be won in a single day. But, at the very least, they had paved the way for those who would follow. The battle may have been won, but Vanessa knew the war was far from over. The changes within the police department were just the first step. There was still an entire system that needed reform, and she had no intention of stopping now. A few months after winning her case, Vanessa founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of police violence and discrimination. The first office was nothing more than a small room, but it quickly became a hub for hundreds of letters from people seeking justice, families who had lost loved ones to police brutality, individuals who had been wrongfully accused, and those who simply wanted to be heard. Ethan, now without his badge, stood at a crossroads. He no longer belonged to the police force, but he also couldn't turn his back on justice. One day, his phone rang. "I need your help." Vanessa's voice carried a firm yet warm tone. "I'm not sure what I can do anymore," Ethan admitted. "You understand the system from the inside. We need to train young officers before they get pulled into the same mistakes you once made. If we change the way they think from the start, maybe no one else will have to go through what I did." Ethan was silent for a moment. He thought back to his years in uniform, believing he was doing the right thing, only to realize he had become part of the problem. "I'm in." From that day forward, Ethan became an ethics and accountability instructor for new officers, using his own story to warn them about corruption, bias, and the moral dilemmas they would face. Vanessa and Ethan's story didn't just stay within one city, it became a movement. Their fight was discussed in media panels, congressional hearings, and nationwide protests demanding justice. More young officers began questioning the system. More citizens started standing up when they saw injustice. Vanessa received invitations to speak, consult, and train government agencies, but she knew this was just the beginning. That evening, after a long day of meeting with people seeking justice through her organization, Vanessa took a quiet walk down an empty street. Her eyes settled on a monument, honoring those who had fought for equality and justice before her. A gentle night breeze carried the weight of an unfinished battle. She stood in silence, running her fingers over the cold stone, tracing the names of those who had fought before her, those who had fallen in pursuit of the ideals she now carried forward. With a quiet resolve, she made a promise to herself. "I will not stop." Her story with Ethan was not over, and perhaps it never would be, but they had opened a path for millions of others to walk. The story of Vanessa Carter and Ethan Hayes was never just about them. It was about the countless voices silenced by those who abused power. They stood up when they had nothing left to lose, fighting not just for themselves, but for those who never got the chance to fight. The system was flawed, but that didn't mean they had to accept it. The truth could be hidden for a time, but it would never be buried as long as there were people willing to stand up. Every action, every voice, and every resistance had the power to create change. Now, looking back on this story, what would you do? If you were in Vanessa or Ethan's position, would you stay silent, or would you stand up? Share your thoughts below.